Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Virtual Rocket Boys Festival. I'm Burke Allen in Washington, D.C., and this is our first writers' workshop of the festival. And we've got folks joining us from all over the country, all over the world, who are not able to perhaps attend the live Rocket Boys festivals previously, but are able to join us virtually. And so, if there's a blessing to the COVID pandemic, it's this that we have an opportunity to get together one on one in person from wherever we are. And joining us from Rocket City, USA, Huntsville, Alabama, New York Times #1 best-selling author Homer Hickam. Hello, Homer.
Hey, Burke, how you doing, buddy?
I am well. And also joining us for our writers' workshop today, our special guest author, Lisa McCombs. Hey, Lisa.
Hey.
Thank you so much for being here. Homer, we have lots of students who are going to chime in both live and also we'll be watching the replays of the Virtual Rocket Boys Festival afterwards. And I want to talk a little bit about the craft of writing because you started as a writer very young. You've talked before about doing a little local newspaper for your community there in Colwood, but where did the writing bug first hit you?
Well, I think that Lisa will also agree that to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. So I started out, reading at a very early age. I can't remember when I didn't read. My mom said I taught myself, but I think she actually taught me before I went off to school. And I just loved to read. And I started absorbing all these stories and how to tell a story. Plus, I grew up in West Virginia, where people just naturally know how to tell a story. Ultimately, though, when the time comes and you sit down and you start writing, you realize that it's hard. It's really hard to put the story that you know so well and craft it so that people come in and they want to turn the page to see what's going to happen. This, to me, that took a while to figure out how to do that on the written page, as versus just being able to tell a story out loud. So it is a craft. It is you may have the talent, but ultimately writing is hard work, and writers have to understand that they've got to put the hours in front of the computer. Used to be the typewriter or the paper and pen, but you have to put in the time, and you also have to be willing to criticize yourself and be able to go in and rewrite. If there's any magic to my work, it always comes out in the rewrite. And I've learned that over time, and I can trust myself now to write and realize that I don't think it's going very well, but trusting myself that I can go back and rewrite it and make it into something special.
We're looking on the screen now at a picture of your latest book, Carrying Albert Home, and that is book number, is it 19, 20?
Yeah, 18, I think, but I won't swear to that. Linda my wife keeps better count than I do on the number. I have to say that that book came out in 2015, and a lot of things have happened in between, but now I'm writing a new book that's going to be about my life after Rocket Boys. But I loved writing Carrying Albert Home. It gave me, every once in a while an author starts writing a book and it's fun to write it. And you just look forward to writing it every day. And writing about my parents carrying their pet alligator back to Florida in the middle of a depression. I just had so much fun with that, and remembering some of the stories that they told me and expanding on that. I think that the fun that I had writing it comes out on every page.
You said 18 books, and of course you've done some Kindle singles too, some short stories. Lots of times, Homer, we'll hear from authors or wannabe authors that say, I've got a book in me and I should write that book. And I'm sure you've heard it 1,000 times. But then there's the second book and the third book. And I wonder where the inspiration comes to keep on writing. Is it ever a thing where you go, man, I don't have anything left in the well to draw from? Or is it the other end of the spectrum where there are more stories than you have time to write down?
Yeah, there were more stories, and I can't say that I really realized that until I had Torpedo Junction and then Rocket Boys come out. Rocket Boys really made my career. It's kind of nice when publishers are knocking on your door and asking you what's next. And that, of course, is a great incentive. But Rocket Boys really made my career. It's kind of nice when publishers are knocking on your door and asking you what's next. And that, of course, is a great incentive. But to keep writing. But all those stories were inside of me that just came out. What I tell new authors is that sometimes you have to get that first book out of your system, and don't get hung up on it. Get it out of your system. If it doesn't work, that's fine. You really learned a lot just writing that book. It's probably going to be the next book or the book after that you really are able to develop your style and really start picking up readers who like what you do. So I run across writers. I've held writers workshops over a period of time, and I keep running across the same writers coming back to my workshop, still working on the same book, and it's like, okay, that's fine. Get it out of your system though, and go ahead and finish it, and move on to the next one, because you're going to be really surprised at how much easier and better that second book's going to be.
Now, having said that, this book, Rocket Boys, international bestseller, translated into a couple of dozen languages. There was a movie made about it. Do you ever look back at that book and go, man, I wish I would have written it differently, or I wish I would have done this or that? Do you armchair quarterback it in the past, or are you pleased with the way it turned out?
Well, naturally I'm pleased. If I went back, I probably would revise it and ruin it. So I'm glad I can't go back.
Right. Right.
Because, your perspective changes over a period of time, and you hear from people who like this part and that part and that part, and they don't ever mention this other part. And the temptation might be to leave that part out, but I think it works as a whole. So I'm glad that it's never been presented to me to go back and rewrite. I don't think it ever will. I think it's one of the reasons. Well, I met Harper Lee, who wrote To Kill a Mockingbird some years ago. I was Alabama's author of the year. Got to meet Harper Lee, and she said, I'm paraphrasing here to a certain extent, but she said, "Well, I heard you wrote a classic, Homer." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she said, "Well, you do realize that your readers will never forgive you for it." And I didn't understand exactly what she meant, but I do now. I understand, because I'll be talking about my 14th book, and which set in World War II or something, and people, I'll wind down from talking about that, and a little hand will go up, and it'll be, "Did you really blow up your mother's rose garden fence?" So, they bring you back to the book that they know the best. But, that's great. I'm very happy that book worked and worked well.
It's the virtual Rocket Boys Festival Writers Workshop today. And by the way, there is an essay contest as part of the virtual Rocket Boys Festival, where you can receive some autographed copies of Homer's book, Rocket Boys, and other goodies, and more details on that on the Facebook page for the Rocket Boys Festival. Our guest author in the Writers Workshop today is Lisa McComb. She's an award-winning author and was also Marion County's Reading Teacher of the Year. She also does public speaking. And Lisa, would you agree with Homer that in order to be a strong writer, you first have to be a voracious reader?
Absolutely. You have to read everything you can get your hands on.
What made you begin writing?
Actually, I began writing when I was very, very young, but I didn't plan to, I wanted to publish, but I didn't think it would happen until a particular 8th grade group that I was teaching dared me to write a book. And that's actually what we did together. That was my curriculum for that year. And when I realized that I was going to publish that first book, I told my students that I would meet them at the classroom door the following fall with something for them. And I met them at the door with copies of my first book, Abby.
Nice.
And this was our writing project for that year. So after that, I was hooked. And I wrote a second book in this little trilogy I self-published. The second one is called Raspberry Beret. And then the third one is called Opening Pandora's Box. And this is a trilogy, a story of a young girl who attended 7 different schools in 5 years. And when she finally landed in a little place called Monongah, West Virginia, which really does exist. I'm sitting there right now. I can't remember what I was going to say now, but it is the story of Abby in 7th grade, 8th grade, and 9th grade. And my students helped me put this together. They encouraged me to do it, and I dedicated all of the first three books to them. When I discovered Kathy Teets in Headline Books, I was very excited, and I think we've had a very good relationship since then. My first book with her was Bombs Bursting in Air. You can see it on the screen there on the right, and it has won multiple awards, and I'm so very proud of it. But with Bombs Bursting in Air, a series was born, and the series is called The Church of Go. Bombs Bursting in Air is the first book in the series. Praise Petals is the second book, and I'm working on the third right now.
Lisa, what genres of books do you write?
Mainly young adult, middle grade to young adult, but it's all 6th grade reading level. They're clean books. I like to call them clean books. I would say they're probably young adult religious books, but they're not preachy. They're just good, clean stories.
And Homer, you also have written YA or young adult novels, and certainly some of your Coalwood trilogy books are targeted a little bit younger. Is it a special challenge, Homer, for you to write for the young adult audience, because you're not a young adult anymore?
Well, thank you for pointing that out, Burke.
I hesitated as I said it, but it was already out there. I couldn't take it back.
You couldn't stop yourself, could you? No, that's a tough market to write for. And I recognize that you're right. I'm not a young adult and don't really know a lot of things that the young adults of today go through. I have to say that writing Rocket Boys and then The Coalwood Way and Sky is Stone, which is my trilogy, the Coalwood trilogy, that of course I wrote that from my point of view from the late 1950s and the early 1960s. I'm not surprised, but I do recognize that I hear from a lot of young people who say that they can identify with those characters still. There's still the family relationships. There's still the friendships. There's still going to school and dealing with things academically and everything. So there's when you're a young person, there are a lot of similarities no matter what era you're in. When I was asked specifically to write a young adult series by Thomas Nelson, it's now owned by HarperCollins, HarperCollins Christian, they asked me to write a series of young adult novels, and I thought about that and realized that I really wasn't equipped to do that, to write about today's young adults. So I set it 200 years in the future. And that way those young adults were however I wanted them to be. And that worked. That's the Crater series, the Crater Crescent and Crater True Blood and the Lunar Rescue Company. That was the trilogy set on the moon. So I had a lot of fun with that. And I wrote it for young adults, but I think adults have enjoyed it as well. But it is a very difficult genre to write, young adult. And also, I have to say one of the toughest genres to write are the romance novels. And you go into a bookstore and look at all those paperbacks that are romance novels, and you think, oh well, you flip through a few pages and you say, oh, I could write one of those. Actually, it's one of the toughest genres to write, and for a couple of reasons. Like young adult novels, the reader comes to it with certain expectations. And if you don't meet those expectations, then you're not going to be successful. I did try to write one romance novel just to see if I could do it. It was a novel called Red Helmet. It worked out pretty well, but poorly titled. Should have been called The Coal Miner's Wife, but hey, but different genres have different expectations, and young adult is definitely one, romance is another. Science fiction is too, I might add.
As we look at all these different book titles that you've written, Homer, they're across a bunch of different genres, and we have lots of young people probably who are watching who have an interest in writing, and they're not sure how to go about it. There are some authors that do everything in one genre, or most of their books in one genre. Somebody who comes to mind is John Grisham, who's very well known for writing legal thrillers. He's written a few other things. But as I look across all of these book covers of yours, I see memoirs. I see, Back to the Moon, which was about the space shuttle being hijacked. I see these young adult sci-fi books, the Crater Trueblood books. There's a dinosaur hunter book, which was a fictitious story about hunting dinosaur bones. There are World War II novels, the romance book. You're all over the place, and I wonder if that's because that's where the writing muse takes you, and then secondarily, is that a good way to go about it, or should you really sharpen that saw and try to get really, really strong at one genre of writing?
Yes to everything. The fact is that I'm a publisher's nightmare. They would have much preferred that I just wrote Rocket Boys over and over and over again in one guise or the other. And I actually recognize that. But fortunately, Rocket Boys gave me at least the financial freedom to write whatever I wanted to write. And I've just, whatever I'm passionate about at the time kind of leads me in that particular direction. Of course, I had my first book was Torpedo Junction, which was a World War II nonfiction history of the U-boat wars up and down the East Coast. So I had a lot of research that from that book that led into the Josh Thurlow series, The Keeper's Son, The Ambassador's Son, and The Far Reaches. And I needed to write those books, and I felt like that I would have an audience for them, and I did. A different audience from Rocket Boys. A lot of people who've read the Josh Thurlow series have no idea that, unless they read the back cover, that I also wrote Rocket Boys. The sci-fi young adult, yeah, it was a lot of fun to write that. The Dinosaur Hunter came out of my love of amateur paleontology and actually going out to Montana. You went with me the last time, Burke, remember?
I did.
And hunting for dinosaur bones, and also, but what really came out, I have to say, what is probably the thread that runs through all of my books is that I try to create strong characters. So that if there's any strength to my writing, it's because I tried to build them on strong characters. And it's not necessarily the story, it's the people who inhabit them. And because I think that what people are really interested in is other people. So I try not to forget that no matter what genre that I'm working in, that ultimately, if I don't develop characters that people are interested in and want to turn the page to see what happened, it doesn't matter what I'm writing about, it's not going to work.
This is the Writers Workshop portion of our virtual Rocket Boys Festival. If you have questions or comments for Homer Hickam or our special guest, award-winning author Lisa McCombs, be sure to send them in the chat feature there in Facebook Live or in YouTube, and we'll be happy to ask those questions if you happen to be watching live, and we know certainly lots of folks will watch after the fact, and I'm sure that both Lisa and Homer will be happy to answer questions that come into them on their websites via email. Lisa, I want to ask you about the technique of writing, and generally when I speak with authors, and we work with a bunch of them, they tend to fall into one of two categories, Lisa. There are the authors that they don't write anything until sort of the inspiration strikes them. And then there are the folks that look at it in a very workmanlike way. They will sit down at their computer and not get up for a set amount of time, or not get up until they've written a certain number of words, say 2,000 words. Which camp do you fall into? And when you talk to your students, how do you advise them to go about writing?
That's a tough question, actually. I just discovered recently that I'm what is called a pantser. That means that I just write from the cuff of my pants. I don't have a plan. I don't outline, but I write every day. And I've always been a journal keeper. I write all the time. After I finished writing Bombs Bursting in Air, I realized that I can write about anything, actually. And I love to come up with stories accustomed to our young adult audience. And Mr. Hickam is correct that young adult it's a tough genre to write effectively. And my goal is to reach every young reader who picks up one of my books. I want them to know that they're not alone. You know, somebody else understands where they're coming from. And I don't know, I'm kind of caught in a time warp because I think my favorite years in life were 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. I don't know why. There was nothing particular about them that made that so, but I remember those feelings. I remember the angst and, you know, the lack of self-confidence and the frightful feelings over growing up. I mean, it's scary to grow up. It really is. And we're in a constant state of controversy between who we want to be and who we are. So, you know, getting back to what you originally asked, I retired from teaching 5 years ago, and I miss that interaction with young folks because they're a special breed, and they really do want to be understood, and they really do want to, you know, fulfill their dreams like I did, because they knew that was my dream to write. So I feel like I'm a good role model for them. And I miss them. I really do. So I keep writing because of them.
Thanks, Lisa. Homer, when you were writing Rocket Boys, you were not that teenage Sonny Hickam and hadn't been that teenage Sonny Hickam. And in fact, for folks who aren't familiar with Homer's backstory, you'd lived a life far away from Coalwood. I mean, you worked for, you know, NASA and were in Japan for a while. You spent some time in Europe for a while. You've geographically been all over the place, and your life was very full, and that story was in the distant past. And I wonder how you were able to get back in touch with that kid. Did you call the other Rocket Boys? Did you ask people that still lived in Coalwood for memories? You know, how did you rebuild that whole thing?
Yeah, Bert, good question. The reason that I ended up writing Rocket Boys was that I was asked. I was freelance writing, which, by the way, is a great way to learn how to write books. Is to write short articles and learn how to hook an editor with the first sentence, you know, if not the first paragraph. And I was asked by Smithsonian Air and Space Magazine to write something, 1,500 words. They needed it by the next day. And could I write them something? And I actually had not planned ever to write about Coalwood and growing up there till maybe my last book, because I didn't think anybody would be interested, frankly. And so I had an artifact from the Rocket Boys days, an old rocket nozzle sitting on my desk I was using for a paperweight. And I looked at it and something just clicked in my head, and I told the editor I could write you 1,500 words on when I was a kid in West Virginia and built rockets. And the editor was completely, totally, utterly underwhelmed with this idea. So I did it anyway. And lo and behold, when it came out, it was very popular. And I started hearing from a lot of folks. I had already published Torpedo Junction, and I heard from some New York editors and even Hollywood about it. And so that's when I realized, you know, they asked me if I was going to write. And memoirs were hot then. It was the time of Angela's Ashes were coming out. And so the memoir was a kind of a hot, brand new genre. And so I said, well, I guess I'm going to write about it now. And so I started. And my take on it at first, again, like you said, I had been back to West Virginia for many, many years. I'd lived all over the world, had a lot of different experiences. I was working for NASA at that time, very busy with NASA. I was going back and forth to Russia, actually, negotiating on the International Space Station. So my take on it was, from my perspective of that day, the way I was going to write that book, it was going to be this important NASA engineer or manager who was looking back on his life, and I would tell about what I was doing today, and then I would hop back to Coalwood and tell a little story there, and then back to this life. And after I was about 200 pages in there, I knew this does not work. I mean, I'm not even interested. So I realized somehow it got into my head, thank goodness, that the only way this story was going to work was if I wrote it from the perspective of that boy, as if it was the boy telling that story. And so that meant I had to do some tough work. I'd like to say I got $1 million worth of psychotherapy writing Rocket Boys that I didn't even know I needed. And so, so I went back in my head until I was that boy, 14 through 17-year-old Sonny Hickam, and let him tell the story. And as he was telling the story, sometimes I was absolutely appalled at his feelings that I'd forgotten existed about his, especially with his father, and the way that his mother had manipulated him, that looking back on it, or back inside that head, now I could see how he was being manipulated. It was fascinating in a way, but it was psychologically a very difficult book for me to get through. I was sure happy that when I wrote the last page, and then after it was a big success, I had to get back inside that boy's head 2 more times at least, with the Cold Way and then Sky of Stone. But it was a little bit easier the second, third time than it was for the first.
Interesting. And were there memory aids? Were you somebody who kept journals from when you were a kid, or artifacts that help you remember things? Because I think back to my own childhood, and there are pieces that you remember, but you had to fill in quite a bit of detail from a reasonably short amount of time. So what were the memory aids that you used? I think that'd be helpful for a lot of memoir writers.
Well, maybe so. I decided early on, though, not to taint my own memories by calling the other Rocket Boys or even talking to my mom, who was alive at that time, about it, because I knew that they would see it from a different perspective. And then if they told me a story and I didn't use it, then they would probably be unhappy that I didn't use it or tell it from their perspective. So I realized that I had to get inside that head of that boy. I was absolutely actually astonished at all the things that I did remember. I did have to look a few things up about what causes a mountain bump and things that happen. A mountain bump is where it's like a little earthquake when you're in mining country, where the mine collapses, the old part of the mine collapses, and it shakes the whole town. Well, growing up, I never knew what caused that, so I had to go, do some research to find that kind of thing. But ultimately, I had all those chain of memories in my head that I was able to go do. But I did try to test those memories against reality by I'm a pretty good researcher. I can really dig into some things and learn a lot more about things than actually ends up on the written page. And Ernest Hemingway was right in saying that the reader knows if you know something, even if you don't write it out. They just know, they sense it. If you're telling them something that you don't know and making things up. So I tried to make sure that the memoirs that I wrote were grounded on reality and maybe not some false memory that I might have.
We are taking questions from aspiring writers, from students, from teachers. If you have a question, send it to us on Facebook Live as we broadcast there, and simulcast on YouTube as well, for author Homer Hickam and guest author Lisa McCombs. Lisa, when you write, is there a research portion to what you do, or is it all just out of your head?
No, I do a lot of research. I didn't really in the beginning, but I have written one nonfiction book that actually Kathy inspired me to write. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2001, 6 months after the birth of my only child. So I had to relearn how to talk, how to walk, how to feed myself, the whole time not being able to even care for my child. So having never even heard of multiple sclerosis, I had to start my research journey then. So since then, I have continued with the research for my young adult books, because I always have a theme of some sort in the young adult books. The first book that I wrote for Kathy, Bombs Bursting in Air, I did a lot of research into the military, because my main character's father was a veteran. So I had to do a lot of research there. In the second book that I wrote for Kathy in the series, Praise Petals, some of my characters have some issues that we don't talk about a lot with kids, and that's self-mutilating and depression. So I was forced to do some really uncomfortable research for that one, but I'm glad I did, because it helps me, get a better perspective on my audience and the young people who are reading my books. So I think research is a very valuable key to any writing. You have to know, you write what you know, but there's always more to learn. There's always more to know. So yeah, research is important.
And I think it's interesting. You mentioned your book that was based on your own experience with multiple sclerosis. So tell me about, so for all of our viewers, your website address is
www.ladywiththecane.com.
ladywithacane.com. I love it. Very inspiring stuff. We have a question for Homer from Amanda, and she writes, Mr. Hickam, have you ever considered writing a children's book based on the Rocket Boys? I teach third grade, and I'm sure it will most definitely appeal to young students in grades 1 through 3. That's an interesting thing, because you and I talked about when we were in Montana that we were approached, if you remember, by a group of teachers and elementary school teachers, and you said, you ought to be careful about just throwing Rocket Boys to them because it's not written for little kids. So would you ever consider doing a children's book based on that story?
Yeah, I do get that a lot. I see, like, somebody in a child in the like second, third, fourth grade that people are buying Rocket Boys for, and I'm going, you really need to read this book first, and because I didn't write it for children. I wrote it for adults, really, and it has a lot of adult themes in it and some adult scenes. I have been approached over the years to write a grade school version or younger, and I may do that. Yeah, it's I'm a little bit reluctant to write anything that might damage the book that I'm best known for and that people love. I got to be very careful about that, and so I've tried. It's one of the reasons I haven't written very much about my life after the Rocket Boys era. I'm now going to take that on with the next book, but yeah, I see that there is a need for it, and if I get time and everything, all the stars line up, it might happen.
Lisa was a teacher for many years, recently retired in the last 5 years or so. I know, Homer, that I've worked with a lot of teachers out there all over the country, and I wonder if there are common threads that you hear from teachers whenever you're out doing writers' workshops for school groups, or if there's a message you'd like to share with teachers who may be watching right now.
Well, I love teachers. Naturally, teachers are very important to me and very special to me. We have, you're welcome, Lisa. I'm on the board here in Huntsville, Alabama, for Space Camp, and we have teachers come every summer, and I always go out, and they know to call me. I will go out and talk to the teachers and tell them how much I appreciate them and the work that they do. And it's teachers up and down the spectrum are amazing. There are a set of teachers over in the United Kingdom that have adopted Rocket Boys as their story, and October Sky, because of Miss Riley, I think, who's the main character. And I hear from them constantly, and they're always doing a whole lot with that story and actually going out and launching rockets and just having a ball with it. And that's from, language teachers on up through STEM type teachers. They all get something out of this story. And I hear from teachers in China and teachers in South America and Europe and everywhere. And it's pretty amazing how that story touches them, and also how they recognize that there would not have been a story without a teacher and or a set of teachers. At first, the teachers I had in grade school and junior high school, but Miss Riley, there would not have been a Rocket Boy story without Miss Riley.
very pivotal in that story, and what an inspiration for teachers everywhere. And Lisa, you got a big smile on your face after that.
Well, because he's talking my language. He's talking those years that I have such fond memories of, 7th and 8th and 9th grade, the junior high years. That what a pivotal time in any child's life. Plus, my cat keeps jumping on my head. So
That's all right.
my cat off.
You guys have that in common. Must be an author thing. Homer's a cat guy too, so.
I am. Every once in a while you'll hear a meow in the background. That's one of
That's
her.
her. That's common.
I think they're coming from both sides. Both sides. Lisa, as an educator for all these years, I wonder, from your vantage point, is writing stronger or less strong for young people these days than when you started as a teacher?
That's interesting, because when I started as a teacher, that was 36 years ago, kids didn't really want to write. But at the time I retired, 2015, I saw a spike in interest. I don't know whether it's because I'm in a very rural area and, kids are very impressionable to begin with. But I was very, very pleased that by the time I retired in 2015, I had kids begging me for books, whether they wanted my books or books off my shelves in my classroom. And that was very gratifying, especially with, the computer craze that started about 10, 15 years ago. My own son, he's 19 years old, a college sophomore, and I don't think he understands life without a computer in front of him. He doesn't read anymore unless it's online. So it really, really warms my heart when I have kids come to me and say, Miss McCombs, I really want to write. I want to do what you do. So that's exciting to me.
One of our virtual Rocket Boys Festival sessions coming up on Thursday is the business of books, and we'll have 3 different publishers participating in that and talking about how that industry's changed. Homer, you've been a professional writer now for better part of 2 decades. You've seen enormous changes in that industry. I don't believe you're in that publisher session, so I wonder if you could give us, from your vantage point, where you see the book industry going.
Yeah, it's very interesting how it's evolved. When I started out, it was still the traditional Publishers Row up in New York that Ernest Hemingway and John Steinbeck knew. There wasn't much difference. They had the big publishers up there, and if you wanted to have a successful career, you needed to be published by them, because they had the New York Times bestseller list all locked up, and also all the bookstores and everything. But over that 20 years, the publishing industry has just completely, utterly changed. We have seen the rise of ebooks. We have seen the rise of independent publishers all over the country. You no longer have to be in New York. And as a matter of fact, the publishers in New York are no longer in New York, especially with COVID. They're all out in Long Island and everywhere else. The editors are not in New York City. And so we see a diversification of the publishing industry that's revolutionary and pretty amazing. And I've tried to get involved with that as much as I possibly can. Once upon a time, the big New York publishers were the kind of the gatekeepers for literature. And if you didn't go, that's where you went. You wanted to pass through those gates, and then that you can make your career there. That's just no longer true. So writers these days have greater opportunity to be published across the spectrum, but at the same time, they have less opportunity to get well-known in a hurry because these gatekeepers are gone. So it's interesting how it's developing. Ultimately, if you love to write, you're going to write no matter what the platforms are out there. And if you love to read, you're going to read no matter what the platforms are out there. I read on my iPad now, mostly, mainly because I'm a little bit older now and I can make the font bigger and I can read it easier, and the backlight is kind of nice. So I understand that. I also understand the readers who still love to hold the book and have the, you know, the paper in front of them and being able to turn the page, all of that. But the publishing industry, I cannot predict where it's going. But it is definitely changing, and the writers you have to be nimble enough to change with it as it goes along. And, you know, as I've often said, I write to be read. And I hear from writers that say, "Oh, I just write because I love to write, and I don't care if anybody reads it or not." It's like, who are you? I don't understand you. We write, we write to be read, and therefore we have to create something. You can call it a product, if you will. That it's more than that, but it is in a way a product that we want the consumer, our reader, to want that product, and then want any other product that you might create. So there's a lot of marketing involved, as you very well know, Burke.
Sure.
You're the marketing king. AlanMediaStrategies.com. And everybody,
checks
all you
in the mail
out there. and of course, my wife's hovering, and she's saying, "Don't forget, Homer, that we have books out here for Christmas, HomerHickam.com," because that's the way she makes her pin money, is selling autographed books, Homer Hickam books for Christmas and birthdays and all that kind of thing. So by all means, go to HomerHickam.com and bookshop and for Linda, so that she can have a little money, for a little gas money, you know.
Now, Lisa, are you similar to Homer in that way? Do you write to be read, or do you write because you enjoy it?
Well, originally I wrote because I enjoy it, and it was kind of therapeutic for me. But since I have been receiving some acclaim, I want people to read me, and I'm writing to a specific audience, and I want them to hear me, and I want them to talk back to me, and I want them to interact, with me and my product. Yeah.
Fair enough. We've got a question here for you, Homer, from Molly, who says, "I'm an 8th grade teacher of talented and gifted students, and I teach your book each year. We love it. What advice can you give our students to encourage them to reach for the stars, as Miss Riley did for you and your friends?"
Well, I think, the message of the Rocket Boy story is just that. If you have a passion for anything in life, no matter where you come from, who your parents are, or what your economic background is, and so on, if you have that passion and are willing to work for it, then you're probably going to be, you're probably going to make it. You're going to make it. But also, I think it also says something. It's like, if you have a passion, don't hold it inside. Let other people know, and you'll be amazed at the people that will step up and help you. Your teachers, the adults in your life that you respect, they will step up and help you. So don't just have a dream and just say, "Oh, I don't want to tell anybody. I'm ashamed of my dream," whatever it may be. You got to step up and let people know, and then start working towards success.
Lisa, what about you? How would you encourage students? I know you're not in the classroom anymore, but what advice would you give to students to encourage them in the day that you were a teacher? If you had a kid that came in and he needed that extra boost, what would you say to him?
Just, I like that term, shoot for the stars. I mean, it's out there. Unfortunately, I don't think I realized that fully for myself until just the last few years. So, I don't want kids to hang back. I want them to take their time, but I want them also to visualize and know that the possibilities are there. They're always there. And when Mr. Hickam was talking about, the publishing industry 20 years ago as opposed to today, my dream was always to be a Random House author. And I'm not, and that's okay, because I like where I am right now. And the possibilities out there, there are so many possibilities. That's just it. And I just wish kids would internalize that and realize that's a reality. The possibilities are endless. You can do anything. You can be anything you want. You can fly a rocket. You can learn how to maneuver a wheelchair. I mean, it's all out there, and it's possible.
This is the Writers Workshop. As part of our virtual Rocket Boys Festival, we're doing 2 of these, one today, one tomorrow, and then a special session on the business of books on Thursday. Homer, in today's world, it seems that attention spans have gotten shorter and shorter. There was even a big video company rolled out earlier this year, a company called Quibi. Unfortunately, they debuted in April, which is a horrible time to roll out something like that. But it was a video content platform that folks who had their cell phones with them all the time could watch short 10-minute movies. And the idea was people who were in line at the airport or the grocery store, that sort of thing. If you read newspaper stories now, they're much shorter. There's lots of graphics, information graphics. Does that mean in your mind that it's going to make it tougher for someone who writes a 400-page novel or even a 300-page novel to cut through? Are we moving in a direction of short stories, or will there always be room for a longer book?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be room for a long or short story as long as it's well told. And that's the ultimate requirement.
The story's the thing then to you.
Yeah, well, the characters as much as the story. I mean, if you have to, what I recommend for writers is pay attention to people, because that's what people are interested in, is other people. And fortunately, growing up in West Virginia, almost everybody there is something of a character. So
a lot of great storytellers.
Yeah, we're great storytellers, and we live, great or broad lives, let's say, different lives. And so I think that's the strength of Southern writers in general, is that we grow up with characters, characters who are characters, if you will. And we also grow up with the storytelling kind of embedded in our DNA, that we can do that. So short story, long story, I'm glad to see that actually the market for short stories is coming back. When I started off 20 years ago, there was almost no really market for short stories anymore. Jack London, I don't know what Jack London would do. Well, he of course called a while, but he mostly wrote short stories, and they were published in magazines like Collier's and Saturday Evening Post and all that kind of thing. So short story writers had a place. But all that had gone away by the late 1990s. There was hardly any market for it anymore. And so it was all the long form that they wanted. Then as the publishing industry evolved, one of the first platforms that came back for short stories was Amazon's Kindle Single. And I was approached as that started coming out a decade or so ago and asked to write basically in the short form, short stories or short novellas. And I had to kind of wrap my mind around that, on how to do that. And ultimately ended up, the first one was Paco the Cat Who Meowed in Space. And that was a true story, but it had to be shortened, and everything had to be shortened. And it had, I had to, work with that form. So I was glad to see that that's coming back. So now there are a lot of short ebooks, and we're seeing a lot of, in some cases, it's like short movies and so on. And a lot of people say, well, it's the attention span. I think it's less the attention span, but more that we're relearning how to tell a story in a short form and keep it interesting and dynamic, and we're just simply learning how to do something that I'd say back in the 19th century was done an awful lot and kind of fell into disfavor in the 20th, and now interestingly enough is coming back in the 21st.
Lisa, in the craft of writing, what mistakes do beginning writers make? What are the things you should stay away from? What are the pitfalls I'm sure as a teacher, you probably saw things over and over again. What are some of those common mistakes that beginning writers make?
Well, I think if we go back to the topic of research, if you're going to be a writer, you need to do your research on publication, on agents, on corporations and businesses that deal with books, because it's very, very easy to fall into the hands of someone who is not really on the up and up. Probably about 30 years ago, I was attempting to write romance novels. I don't know why. I don't even like romance. But I got involved with a publishing company that after I really started looking at them and I went to the Better Business Bureau, I discovered that they were frauds. And I had already dumped a bunch of money in it. And it was painful, but it was a good learning experience. So, you know, if you're going to get into the publishing business, I'm pretty much a newbie at this too. But I think you really need to look outside the box. Don't believe everything you're told. Don't believe everything you read. You know, just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it's true. So, you know, you need to be careful about that.
That's interesting. It's good advice. And Homer, let me ask you a similar question, but sort of turn it towards the writer themselves. If you're a writer in the craft of writing a book or a short story, what mistakes do you see that writers make in the craft of writing? Is there's certain things about sentence structure or character development that you see as a pitfall that folks need to work on?
Yeah, one of the things I tell the newbie writer is don't fall in love with your own writing. You know? The fact is that, in other words, you may fall in love so much with the way that you write and the descriptions and so on that you just wear us out with it. Remember, you're telling a story. You're not trying to make yourself be part of the story by being all flowery with your language and so on. I mean, back in the 19th century, I guess they could get away with that. You know, it's hard to read some of that stuff that was written back then. But because of that, maybe Victorians had more time to sit on a bench and plow through it. I don't know, but that doesn't really work very well today. So what you want to do really is to, if you've got a page, see if you can turn that into a paragraph. And if you got a paragraph, see if you can turn that into a line that really just, wow, you know, instantly puts you into the setting and the character and everything else. That's why writing is hard, is that type of rewriting that you need to do when you go back and rework it. Also, stop telling me who the character is. Once I know who the character is, you don't have to tell me anymore. Stop it. You know, I got it. You don't have to keep describing them, and you don't have to keep having flourishes with them. You know, we got it. So make sure that the character is introduced fairly quickly. We know who that character is. We either hate them or love them or don't care about them. If you don't care about them, get rid of them, by the way. And so really, for me, it's almost like every writer needs to analyze what they're writing, to go back, let it get cold enough that you can go back and really be critical and realize in some cases you've overwritten or where you've underwritten, where you've introduced a character, say, and you don't give enough. We don't really understand who that character is or how they fit with the story. And so, you know, there is a lot of, again, it's work. It's work to get something on a written page, printed page, that makes the reader want to turn the page to see what happened. And ultimately, I just go back. It's like people are interested in other people. You've got to make sure that the people that you're writing about, or the cat or the fox or whatever it is, alive, that you want to know what's going to happen to them.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to study your craft. You know, for young writers or for people new to the writing industry, study your craft, take classes. You know, there are so many things online that you can just jump in there and grab a hold of some key points. There's a big thing that's happening in just a few days, National Novel Writing Month. I encourage every young writer to get involved in NaNoWriMo because it will help you learn what you're doing and where you're going with your craft. Very important.
Great writer, Burke has to, and Lisa, you have to be willing to ultimately let your baby go. You know, you write it and you rewrite it, and you might bounce it off a few people who they all tell you they love it, but even whether they do or not. So ultimately, you have to let it go. You have to let your baby go, and out in that crazy world, and you have to be willing to receive the criticisms that are going to come your way. And if I think that stops a lot of young writers, or any writers, that they're afraid to let their baby go out in that cold, cruel world, because once it's gone, you can't rewrite it. It's there, and it's like we were talking to the actors of October Sky right before this. Acting is a tough business. Writing is a tough business because you get criticized, and you have to be willing to. I don't like it. I much would rather hear somebody praise my work than say they didn't like it. It's interesting. The most recent book, Carrying Albert Home. A lot of people tell me they love the book, but they don't like my mother. She wasn't my mother. They don't like Elsie. They don't like that character. It's like I just wanted to throw the book across the room because I hated that character. And I thought to myself, whoa, I did well.
But yeah, isn't that what we want, Homer? We want a reaction out of our readers.
Yeah, if I don't get any kind of reaction, then I think I failed. And if it is sometimes a negative reaction, about one of the characters, it's like, okay, good, that's fine.
Great advice from our authors in the Writers Workshop today. Thank you, Lisa McCombs. Thank you, Homer Hickam. Be sure to visit Lisa online at ladywithacane.com and homerhickam.com/bookshop. And Homer will be happy to sign books for you and get them to you in time for your birthday, anniversary. The holidays are coming up, and that way you don't need to get out and shop, and you can stay in and stay safe. Thank you, everyone who has been participating with us today in day one of our virtual Rocket Boys Festival. And folks have been chiming in from all over the country with questions and comments for our guests. We'll do it again tomorrow from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Eastern Time. For Homer Hickam and the gang at Theater West Virginia, the sponsors of this virtual Rocket Boys Festival, I'm Burke Allen. Thank you so much for watching and participating, and aim high. Bye, everybody.